Scotland has roughly 3,000 castles. Most of them are photographs. You drive through the Highlands, you stop at a lay-by, you take a picture of something crumbling against a grey sky. You drive on to the next one. But some of them, and this is the part that never quite lands right when people first hear it, are someone's house. Not a museum, not a ruin with an information board and a Heritage Scotland plaque. An actual home. A place where someone this morning woke up inside walls that were raised 500 years ago, where a child somewhere is learning to read in a kitchen where a medieval lord once held court, where the stones around you have absorbed 4 centuries of ordinary life, of births and deaths and dinners eaten in firelight, and they're still doing it today. Scotland has approximately 1,500 surviving castle structures. A small number of those are still privately occupied. An even smaller number were built before 1500. This list covers 10 of them, 10 castles that never became ruins, 10 that were loved enough or stubbornly defended enough, or simply too useful to abandon. They're ranked from remarkable to almost impossible to believe. By the time we reach the first entry, the idea that a castle needs to be empty to be historically significant is going to feel like something someone told you once and you never properly questioned. Entry 10. Blackness Castle, West Lothian. Population of the village approximately 2,000. Situated on the southern shore of the Firth of Forth, about 25 kilometers west of Edinburgh. Blackness is not a romantic ruin on a distant hillside. It sits on a headland, jutting into the water like a military installation because that is what it was built to be. The original fortress dates to 1446, constructed by the Crathes family, who understood that controlling this stretch of the Forth meant controlling access to the river traffic of central Scotland. The walls are thick enough that you could lose a person inside them. The stone bears the particular blackness that gives the castle its name, dark from centuries of North Sea wind and Scottish rain. It has been a royal stronghold, a political prison, a barracks, and a film location for everything from Hamlet to Outlaw King. But what places it on this list is simpler than all of that. Someone lives here. Not a caretaker or a custodian employed by historic Scotland. An actual family. A family that wakes up in rooms where soldiers stood guard 5 centuries ago. The trade-off of blackness is its isolation. The castle rises from a promontory. In winter, the wind carries the Forth directly against the stone walls. To live here is to live with weather as a constant presence, not as background. To accept that the beauty of those views comes with exposure to exactly the kind of conditions that made this site defensible in the first place. Entry 9. Thirlestane Castle, Scottish borders. Population of nearby Lauder, approximately 200, situated in the Lammermuir Hills, 40 kilometers south of Edinburgh. Thirlestane belongs to the Maitland family, who acquired it through the female line in the 15th century and have occupied it continuously since. Continuously. That word requires a moment. Not with interruptions, not through periods of abandonment and recovery. The building visible today is largely 17th century, remodeled under the direction of the first Duke of Lauderdale into something approaching a great house. But beneath that later work, the medieval fortress still stands. The tower house that the Maitlands first inhabited remains structurally intact. The family gardens are among the finest in the borders. The castle operates as both a private residence and a tourist attraction, which means the family negotiates daily the space between domestic life and public performance. A member of the Maitland family, interviewed by a Heritage magazine, described the particular texture of that negotiation. She said, "You make your morning coffee while tourists are being led through the public rooms on the floor below. The boundary between private and shared is more conceptual than physical. The trade-off of Thirlestane is that visibility. Your castle is remarkable enough to warrant visitors. Your home is everyone else's destination." Entry 8. Arnage Castle, Aberdeenshire. Population of the surrounding area, approximately 12,000. 40 kilometers west of Aberdeen, positioned in the upland farming country of central Aberdeenshire. Arnage presents something uncommon in Scottish castle preservation. The original tower house dates to the early 1500s. The castle was modified in the 16th century and again in the 17th. What survives today is a structure that wears its own history in architectural layers. The oldest parts are the hardest, the newest parts are the most convenient, and someone is living in the entire hybrid, negotiating between medieval and modern on a daily basis. The castle was held by the Gordon family for much of its history, then passed through marriage and inheritance into other hands. The continuity was never broken. What is remarkable about Arnage is how ordinary it manages to be despite its age. Photographs from the 1950s show the same building standing in the same landscape. No dramatic restoration, no recent intervention, just steady maintenance across centuries. Someone is inside right now, reading a book under light that is electric, but whose source is a window cut into stone that was shaped before anyone in Scotland knew how to print. The trade-off of Arnage is its rural isolation. Aberdeenshire is beautiful country, but it is not convenient country. The castle sits in farmland. To live here is to commit to a certain distance from everything else. Entry 7. Cawdor Castle, Nairnshire. Population of Nairn, approximately 9,000. 35 kilometers east of Inverness, positioned in the Moray Firth country, where the landscape opens out toward the coast. Cawdor is probably the most famous castle on this list outside of Scotland, largely due to Shakespeare, who set a significant portion of Macbeth at a place he called Cawdor. The historical Macbeth died around 1057. The castle was not built until 1450. The literary Macbeth and the real Cawdor have absolutely nothing to do with each other, a gulf of nearly 400 years. And yet, the Thanes of Cawdor have been living with Shakespeare's invention ever since. The earliest part of the castle is the central tower, confirmed to date from the mid-1400s. It is surrounded by later additions and modifications that make Cawdor look less like a fortress and more like a great house that happened to grow organically around its own military core. The family that lives here now is the 20th generation of continuous occupation since the first stone was laid. The castle is open to visitors part of the year. The gardens are among the most celebrated in the Highlands. The weight of that combination, living as both a family and a museum, maintaining both a home and a heritage attraction, is something every generation of Cawdors has had to navigate. The trade-off is the one nobody mentions when you first fall in love with a castle. Your home is not yours alone. It belongs to history. It belongs to Shakespeare's version of history, which most people know better than the actual history. It belongs to visitors. You live inside all of that simultaneously. Entry 6. Culzean Castle, South Ayrshire. Population of the Ayrshire coast approximately 50,000 across the wider region, 50 kilometers south of Ayr, perched on a clifftop above the Firth of Clyde. Culzean represents something unusual in Scottish castle preservation. The original tower dates to 1380, but the castle visible today is largely 18th century. Robert Adam redesigned Culzean in the 1770s and 80s, transforming it from a military stronghold into something approaching a palace. The Kennedy family held it through centuries of Scottish history. In 1945, they gave it to the National Trust for Scotland. The family retained the right to occupy one wing. They still do. Their private space is bounded by heritage designation. The rest of the castle is managed as a museum and visitor attraction. What this creates is a peculiar domestic arrangement. There are parts of your house where strangers walk freely. There are parts that remain yours. The boundary between those two spaces is not a wall. It is an understanding. A member of the Kennedy family who has lived at Culzean for decades described the particular quality of that arrangement. She said you stop thinking of it as a house you own. You start thinking of it as a house you happen to live in, and the country happens to own the rest. The trade-off is complete. The extraordinary beauty and historical significance of Culzean is preserved in perpetuity. The extraordinary beauty and historical significance of Culzean means you cannot modify your home, cannot extend it, cannot really change much of anything without permission from an organization that thinks in terms of centuries rather than convenience. Entry 5. Crathes Castle, Aberdeenshire. Population of the surrounding Deeside region approximately 20,000. 20 kilometers west of Aberdeen in the valley of the River Dee, one of Scotland's most beautiful river systems. Crathes was built in 1593 by Alexander Burnet of Leys and has remained in the same family ever since. 430 years of continuous occupation by the same bloodline. The name Burnet still matters here. The house belongs to them in a way that is not merely legal but visceral. Crathes is Grade A, listed and owned by the National Trust for Scotland, but the family lives in the historic core of the building, maintaining both the house and their place within its history. The castle contains the Horn of Leys, a medieval drinking vessel given to an ancestor by Robert the Bruce himself as a token of loyalty. The horn is still here. It has never left. 400 years and the same family has kept a king's gift on their mantelpiece. The gardens at Crathes are extraordinary. 7-walled gardens designed across centuries, each one reflecting the horticultural knowledge and aesthetic preference of the generation that created it. The castle represents something increasingly rare in Scottish heritage preservation. A place where the family never sold, never relinquished their claim, never allowed the chain of ownership to break. The trade-off is the weight of it. You do not own Crathes in any conventional sense. You are the current link in a chain that stretches back to 1593. Your responsibility is to pass it on intact to the next generation. That is not something you take lightly. Entry 4. Scone Palace, Perth and Kinross. Population of Perth approximately 50,000. The palace sits immediately north of Perth, on the same ground where Scottish kings were historically crowned. Scone has a deeper history than almost anywhere else in Scotland. The Stone of Destiny was kept here. The ancient kings of Scotland were inaugurated on this stone. When Edward I invaded Scotland, he took the stone back to Westminster, and it remained there for centuries, a symbol of conquered Scotland sitting in an English palace. Scone Palace, as it stands today, is largely 19th century, extensively remodeled and reconstructed by the Earls of Mansfield, who have owned it since the 16th century. The earldom still holds the palace. The family still lives here. The gardens are open to the public. The palace is open to visitors. The living quarters are private. What makes Scone extraordinary is not just its age, but its symbolic weight. This is sacred ground in Scottish history. Kings were crowned here. The power of the nation was sanctified on this ground. To live at Scone is to live inside that historical gravity. A member of the Mansfield family once described what it feels like to walk through rooms where Scottish history pivoted. She said you cannot quite disconnect from what the stones have witnessed. You go about your day, you make your breakfast, you live your ordinary life. And the weight of what happened here 5 centuries ago presses down on all of it. The trade-off of Scone is that weight. You live in a place of genuine historical significance. That significance means you can never quite have a private home in any normal sense. Everything about it matters to someone. Everything about it is watched. Entry 3. Glamis Castle, Angus. Population of the surrounding village approximately 800, 30 kilometers north of Dundee. Glamis is the castle that Scotland decided was haunted. Whether the stories are real or legend matters less than the fact that they have held for centuries. The castle dates to the 14th century at its oldest, though it has been modified and expanded across every subsequent era. The Lyon family, later Lord Strathmore, have occupied Glamis since the late 17th century. Continuously. The castle was the childhood home of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Princess Margaret was born here in 1930, the first royal birth in Scotland in over 300 years. The castle contains what is known as the Secret Chamber, a room allegedly bricked up centuries ago and said to contain something so disturbing that only the Earl of Strathmore is told its nature on his 21st birthday. No one has ever publicly confirmed the existence of the room. The legend persists anyway. According to castle tradition, the ghost of Janet Douglas, a woman burned at the stake on the orders of a Scottish king on charges many historians believe were false, still walks these halls. Known as the Grey Lady, she appears, according to witnesses, in the chapel. A chair is always left empty in the chapel specifically for her. The castle is open to visitors but remains a private residence. The family lives inside the accumulated weight of 4 centuries of documented history and the uncountable weight of legend. The trade-off of Glamis is profound. Your home is where a historical woman was executed. Your home is haunted, whether genuinely or by reputation. Your home is where British royal history was made. Your home is where people come to feel afraid. You navigate all of that every day. The castle has been carefully maintained. The gardens are beautiful. The rooms are extraordinary. And underneath it all, there is this weight of story that never quite lifts. Entry 2. Balmoral Castle, Aberdeenshire. Population of the surrounding Deeside villages approximately 5,000. 50 kilometers west of Aberdeen, in the heart of the Cairngorms, where the mountains rise up and the landscape becomes genuinely wild. Balmoral is perhaps the most famous castle in Scotland, not because of its historical age, but because of what it became. The original castle dates to approximately 1450, a tower house built by the Earls of Mar. It was expanded and remodeled repeatedly across the centuries. In 1852, Queen Victoria purchased the estate. She fell in love with it immediately. She had it substantially rebuilt in the Scottish baronial style. Balmoral became the royal family's private residence. They spend time here every summer. The castle has hosted German emperors, international dignitaries, and the weight of British state business conducted in a private home in the Scottish Highlands. The royal occupation changed everything about Balmoral. It stopped being a private castle and became something more complicated. The family that occupies it is the royal family. The castle belongs to the crown. It is simultaneously the most protected castle in Scotland and the one whose interior is least known. What remains unusual about Balmoral is that despite being a royal residence, despite being among the most famous castles in the world, it is still genuinely lived in as a home. The royal family spends weeks here in autumn. They conduct estate business. They hunt. They walk the grounds. It is not a museum. It is a place of actual residence and actual privacy, protected by that residence from becoming entirely public. The trade-off of Balmoral is that it cannot be considered a normal castle anymore. It crossed some boundary when royalty arrived. Its history cannot be separated from its contemporary use. You cannot understand Balmoral without understanding Victoria, without understanding the weight of what the royal occupation has meant to Scottish identity. It is a castle where history and present simultaneously occupy the same space. Entry 1. Dunvegan Castle, Isle of Skye. Population of the Isle of Skye approximately 10,000 across the entire island. Dunvegan sits on the northwestern coast of the island, accessible by the Skye Bridge from the mainland or by ferry. Dunvegan has been continuously occupied by the chiefs of Clan MacLeod since approximately 1290, 730 years. The same family, the same castle. Not a single documented break in occupation. Not a single moment when the chain was severed. The oldest continuously inhabited castle in Scotland and among the longest continuous family occupations of any building in the entire Western world. What places Dunvegan at number 1 is not only the age and not only the unbroken continuity, though both of those are staggering. What places it here is what the castle contains. Within Dunvegan's walls is the fairy flag, also known by its Gaelic name, Bratach Sea, a fragment of silk dating somewhere between the 4th and 7th centuries. The cloth is so old that its origins predate the castle by nearly 1,000 years. Analysis of the fabric suggests it may have come from Syria or Rhodes. According to Clan MacLeod tradition, the flag was given to a clan chief by a fairy woman, a gift meant to guarantee victory in battle when unfurled. According to clan records, the flag has been unfurled twice. Once at the Battle of Glendale in 1490, once at the Battle of the Spoiling of the Dyke in 1578. Both times the MacLeods won. Whether that was magic or coincidence, or simply the fact that MacLeod's soldiers fought harder because they believed they carried magic, the distinction hardly matters. The flag is real, the silk is real, the dating is real, and it has been kept in this castle by the same family for centuries. The castle sits on the shore of Loch Dunvegan. There is a sea gate, a water entrance that was once the primary access when the castle was designed to be defended from the sea. The lochs of the Isle of Skye carry a particular quality of light, grey-blue, constantly shifting. Mountains rise in the distance. The castle is not isolated, but it is remote in a way that shapes everything about what it is. To live at Dunvegan is to live with the weight of 7 centuries. 700 years of the same family. 700 years of the same story. The current chief of Clan MacLeod is the 30th in the direct line of descent from the first MacLeod who made Skye his seat. 30 chiefs, 30 generations. And the castle remains. The fairy flag remains. The story remains. The particular quality of continuity that Dunvegan represents is almost incomprehensible to modern consciousness. We live in a time of disruption, of change, of movement. Dunvegan is the opposite of all that. It is stability. It is staying. It is a family looking at its ancestral home and saying, "We were here. We are here. We will remain here." The castle is open to visitors part of the year. Tourists walk through rooms where MacLeod chiefs have walked for 700 years. The gift shop sells merchandise bearing the Clan MacLeod symbol. The commercial world has found its way into the castle, and yet the family still lives here, still maintains the clan structure, still keeps the traditions, still keeps the flag. The trade-off of Dunvegan is the one that comes with being 700 years old. You cannot escape your own history. The weight of 7 centuries of continuity is not something you shed when you close your bedroom door. It is the air you breathe. It is the ground beneath your feet. It is the reason you wake up every morning in a castle on an island off the coast of Scotland, carrying a responsibility that your 30 predecessors carried before you. A responsibility that will pass to whoever comes after. And that, more than the age of the stone or the presence of an ancient flag or the beauty of the loch outside, is what makes Dunvegan extraordinary. Scotland has thousands of castles. The overwhelming majority are empty. They are ruins or museums or properties owned by heritage organizations. And the reason most of them are empty is not because they were destroyed, not because they were abandoned, but because families eventually chose to leave. Because the weight of maintaining a castle, of living inside walls so old they predate your nation, of carrying forward a name and a history and a responsibility, eventually became too much. These 10 castles represent something different entirely. They represent families who looked at that weight and decided to carry it anyway. The MacLeods never left Dunvegan. The Cawdor family never left Cawdor. The Burnetts never left Crathes. Generation after generation, century after century, they chose to stay. Not because the castles were convenient or comfortable or even necessarily desirable. They stayed because the castles mattered. They stayed because the stone deserved to be inhabited, not abandoned. They stayed because the responsibility was theirs and they accepted it. These castles are not remarkable because they are old. A ruin is old. A museum is old. These are remarkable because someone is inside them right now. This morning, making breakfast in a kitchen where a medieval family once stood, walking through corridors where 700 years of footsteps have worn the stone smooth, sleeping in a bed that overlooks landscape that has not fundamentally changed since their ancestors first decided to build here and never leave. The past in Scotland is not behind glass. In these 10 castles, it is where someone is putting the kettle on. And if this kind of history makes you look at old places a little differently, subscribe. Because the next time you pass a castle, a ruin, or a strange old house on a hill, it might not just be stone. It might be someone's inheritance, someone's burden, someone's breakfast table. And that is the kind of history we're here to uncover.